Good day, my friends. Well, this is a very monumental video, so welcome aboard because this is the very first Tiger tank of any sorts that I've ever built throughout my modeling days. And yes, there's been a lot of days that I've been modeling. Yes, I'm old. The photographs you're looking at now and the little bit of video you're seeing, this is what I took about a year ago at the museum at Münster. What a wonderful museum, and I really want to say thank you to my host at MBK for allowing me to come into the museum. We got a chance to walk around and climb inside and on board many of these vehicles. What a wonderful experience. The King Tiger here, just a walk around, but you can see the size of this. I'm trying to just kind of hold my phone to take some video here as I walk around here. It's not the best of videos, I admit that, but you get a chance to see some of the at least the outside and the size of this particular vehicle. It's quite impressive, of course, as we all well know. And so that will bring us right to our project for this video, and that will be the 1/72nd scale Flyhawk King Tiger. Yes, it's the small scale version. I'm just kind of taking baby steps into this Tiger world. And so not only is the King Tiger something new for me, so is 1/72nd scale. So there's a lot of new ground being covered here. I've heard great things about the Flyhawk kit, so I'm looking forward to getting started with that. Quick look in the box. Well, a lot of sprues, a lot of very small parts. So we'll see how that goes. What's great about this kit, as you get down to the bottom here, it does come with some nice accessories as well. We do have some photo etch parts in there. We have a metal turned barrel with some resin or printed parts here for the muzzle brake and such like that. So a little bit of added detail and finesse. So I'm looking forward to get started as long as my big fat fingers and my eyes hold out. As with any kit, we just start taking off some of the parts from the sprue. In terms of relative complexity, this does not look like a complex kit. There's not a lot of parts within that box, not a lot of steps within the instruction booklet. A lot of that has to do with the scale and the size of the model itself. But the finesse, the detail on these parts is actually absolutely fantastic. I'm very impressed with that. I mentioned earlier that the kit comes with some extra features, one of those being a photo etch sheet, and those deal with the screens on the rear deck. As my usual practice, I'll darken those up using the metal burnishing fluid. Just drop those into a little cap full of fluid here to get that ready to go. And then just start installing those onto that rear deck. Just a touch of super glue just on the corners, trying to make sure I don't clog up those really nice screen meshes. And so in no time at all, we're really starting to be able to assemble the kit. So I'll make the upper hull with the lower hull. Just kind of put those together, add a few drops of glue here and there, just hold everything together. Kind of move up to the turret here. Little few details there. We'll add the gun mantlet and such. Everything's kind of movable. We've got a little bit of a gun inside there, but I'm going to close up the hatches so we won't be able to see this. Now we'll have our turned barrel, our metal barrel there, will kind of snugly fit on our muzzle brake. And now we're ready to paint. So the paints that I'll be using for this will be AK Generation 3. I'll be using for the base color Dunkelgelb, lightened slightly with ivory. And the road wheels, I just leave these onto the sprue. They're small. I'll touch them up a little bit later. Everything has a coating, a primer coat of Mr. Surfacer White, and then over that the acrylic colors. Now, once I have the base colors down, now it's time to add the camouflage. And I thought about this. How should I do this? Should I tape them off? Should I mask it off? Should I freehand it? I decided, basically this little Tiger tank at 1/72nd scale is not much bigger than some 1/35th scale figures. And I know that the paints will paintbrush very well. So I decided to go ahead and hand paintbrush the camouflage scheme onto this Tiger tank. As for the scheme itself, well, this isn't necessarily an accurate scheme here. I'm not following any particular vehicle, but it's going to have the characteristics of an ambush scheme. I do have some reference book materials, some photographs to the side. I have some images pulled up on my computer. So at least we'll have the characteristic of a camouflage scheme. The first colors down is the red brown or the rot brown, and that again is a deep brown color that I've lightened slightly with the ivory color. Once I get finished up with these brown blotches, now it's time to move on to the green part of the camouflage scheme. And for this, I'll be using olive green, once again lightened up with the ivory color. Now, you may ask, why am I using ivory, say, instead of white? Well, in my experience, if you use pure white, the colors end up being somewhat chalky in appearance. So I tend to try to use an off-white, a cream color, or in this case, ivory, in order to lighten my base colors. And as before, just using the paintbrush and Looking at my references and kind of trying to paint out a camouflage pattern that looks somewhat authentic, somewhat representative of these mighty king tigers. And now finally, as we finish up our camouflage pattern, we'll start adding the distinctive ambush scheme, those little dots that was meant to represent basically sunlight kind of shining through the leaves of trees above. And then just one last final step as I finish up the paint work here. I'm going to go ahead and mask off where the fenders, I'm going to leave the fenders off on this model. So where the fenders might have been, I've seen the reference photographs both ways, where the entire models or the entire vehicle has been painted in the camouflage scheme. And so even if the fenders are removed, you could still see the camouflage scheme. I've seen it other ways where the fenders have been applied before the paint work has been applied at the factory. And so then if the fenders are removed, then you see the primer. I chose option 2 just to add some little visual interest to my model here. A special thank you to all my amazing Patreon members for your incredible support. Your contributions help me continue to create content for this channel. If you're not already a member, I invite you to join our Patreon community. As a member, you'll gain access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, early releases, and more. I hope you'll consider joining Patreon and supporting this channel. Thank you very much. Okay, now we're on to, I guess we'll call this weathering. So not only is this my first king tiger, which is something different for me, this is also a 1/72nd, which is something different for me. So let's add more different things into my mix, at least initially here. So to start off with, generally I would start off with weathering with the oil paints. If you watch any of my videos, you've seen that. I decided this time, change my process a bit, trying to scale it down and just make it interesting for myself, if nothing else. So a lot of the weathering is actually going to be done with acrylic paints. So I'll be using acrylic paints to add chips, to add mud and dust and dirt stains. I'll be using panel line washes, as you see right here, to add the definition and contrast along the panel lines, drawing some of those down over the surface. First level of weathering here to add some of those stains from mud and dirt and things like that. So as we all know, working with acrylic paints like this, it can be kind of dangerous because as they dry, they tend to leave those rings or those tide marks when they dry, and those are ugly and you cannot get rid of them. So I get around that 2 different ways here. One, I thin my paints quite a bit using water, and then secondly, I'll add some paint retarder to the mix as well, so that the paint retarder itself will really slow down the drying process. I keep an eye on those paints because as they start to dry, I can diffuse the paints on the edges, and that will blend away any of those ring marks or tide marks. Also, the retarder helps me to be able to blend colors together, so it almost gives this kind of a quasi working with oils or enamels feel to working with the acrylics. One more element on my Camouflage here is I want to try to portray a warm winter whitewash, but I don't want to do it through the usual chipping methods. So I'm going to use acrylic paints again. We'll show that in just a second. But I want to make it a little bit easier on myself. So I'm going to use some satin varnish. Now, I don't use satin varnishes or any type of varnish for that matter on my models very often. But because I'm going to be using acrylics, I want to be able to have some nice workability. And for the acrylic, I'm going to be using the washable whites or the washable paints. Now, I've not used this much. I've done a little bit of experimenting, and I like the results because I can get a diffused appearance for the whitewash versus, say, the hairspray or the chipping fluid type of a whitewash we see so often. So I'm kind of trying for that. You know, it's been out, it's the end of the season, it's got some rain runoff, and it's just kind of faded back. Now let's see if we can apply this whitewash. What I've started with was just to moisten the surface or dampen the surface with a brush that has just some water. Now using a sponge, just tapping in some of that washable white paint here and there. A little heavier accumulations on one area, a little lighter on another area. Again, it's over a satin surface. It's on a damp surface with the water. This is a water-soluble type of a paint, meaning that it can be manipulated, I can say that fast, with water. And so I think I can start to build this up in layers. But what I'm, again, looking for is that diffused type of an appearance. Here we are on the other side of the turret. Same idea, same technique here. First, start off with some water, moisten the surface, and then we'll add our washable winter whitewash. Well, we basically have our winter whitewash on, and I'm actually pretty happy, pretty pleased with the results here, but it's a little bit, I've lost some definition on the model itself, especially at smaller scales. Sometimes it needs to be a little, what's the word I want? More high contrast, a little more punch. So I'm going to use enamels this time and bring back some of those base colors and just tone down in certain areas the winter whitewash where it's basically diffuse the outline of the model itself. And it looks pretty good. I just feel like there's like one more step that can be done here. And yes, I know you've guessed it, but it's not my first step this time. It's my last step. So I'm going to once again turn to oil paints because I think there's a little bit more that can be pulled out of this model and the paint scheme here by just giving more richness, more depth to these colors. So yes, I'm turning back to oil paints, but just in a limited manner. I do like my decision to go ahead and add the oil paints as a last step here. Interestingly enough, doing it as a last step versus my usual first step, I already had basically a pattern or a roadmap with which just to kind of accentuate or exaggerate, and that was really, really nice. Coming down to the finish line here, just a few extra last moments of weathering here. I'm going to basically accentuate and highlight some of these edges, give them a little metallic effect using just the edge of my pencil here just to kind of buff those out. And I also use this pencil or the graphite just to bring out the highlights, the steel effects, the metal effects on the tracks as well, just bringing out some of those high points and just accentuating some of those edges. And this will start to bring us to the end of this video. And boy, talk about a video that's done some new things. So first Tiger tank ever, first King Tiger ever. I think it's my second 1/72 scale. I believe I did one 72nd some years and years and years ago. I can't remember. I think it was a little Stug if I recall correctly. Tried to get rid of my oil paints, at least for the time being. That wasn't very successful. I did end up using them, but I did push the limits on some other ideas as well. Really enjoyed this video. If you've liked this video, please hit that like and subscribe. I really appreciate that. If you'd like to see more content like this, some experiments I do, some early viewing, things like that, I do have a Patreon page. I'd love to see you over there in that community. Please enjoy these final photographs, and until the next time, everyone, take care and happy modeling.